Medea by Euripides. Overview. In exile in Corinth with Jason and her two sons, the sorceress Medea learns that her husband plans to abandon her for a younger princess, the daughter of King Creon. Facing banishment and the loss of her status, Medea feigns reconciliation while secretly plotting a devastating revenge against those who have wronged her. As alliances shift and her fury mounts, she grapples with the extremes of love turned to hatred and the consequences of unchecked passion. Euripides' gripping tragedy explores betrayal, the plight of women in ancient society, and the conflict in Greek society on what protection really means. Review. If one could enjoy reading a tragic story, then I could be counted as enjoying this book. Medea is a woman slighted by Jason, and whether you believe Jason is doing the right thing, especially for the Greek of the time the story is being written, is the bigger question as to how tragic or to what degree this is a tragedy. Euripides using some great writing to make the audience feel the emotional despair that Medea has and her further descent into it, resulting in the action she takes, as done here. There are a few times that Medea becomes a bit too introspective, with her pointing out that she has reached such a point of madness that she shouldn't do what she is about to do, and it's a bit much even for her, although that may lend to believing her madness more. Euripides does a good job of staying with his female character, and while he doesn't write her to excuse her actions, you understand most of what she does. Once again, the early Greeks as a people seeing what type of story plays out when you let revenge overtakes the person is seen here. Final grade, A-. The Trojan Women by Euripides. Overview. In the smoldering ruins of Troy, the conquered women, Queen Hecuba, her daughter Cassandra, Andromache, widow of Hector, and the despised Helen await their fate as slaves to the victorious Greeks. As the gods look on indifferently and Poseidon laments the city's fall, the captive women's voice their profound grief over lost husbands, children, and homeland. Herald Telethebus delivers the cruel assignment from the Greek leaders, sealing the women's destinies amid heartbreaking farewells. Euripides' haunting anti-war tragedy powerfully indicts the senseless suffering inflicted on the innocents in the wake of conquest. Review. Well, where Medea is the story after Jason and the Argonauts, the Trojan Women is the story right after the Iliad, but before Agamemnon. Euripides' focus on the tragic outcomes of what's going to happen to the captured women of Troy following the sack of the city by the Greeks occurs here. Euripides once again focuses on the plight of women, which is an interesting perspective for his time in nature. There is a mix of some anti-war teachings, or at very least some introspection about the outcomes of war, and again with the focus of it affecting women. While Euripides does write about the tragedy well, the story bounces to too many characters too often, includes a semi-trial of Helen. While it's nice to finally see someone call out Helen for causing about 75% of all Greek literature of the time to be written because of Troy, she's an odd inclusion and takes the focus of all the stories about the women as tragedies away. Andromache and her child's story completes the woeful plot point that I enjoyed in the Iliad, and that was devastating to read about. Overall, I didn't think that the play did as much as it could have, although I'd be willing to... I'm wrong. Final grade, C+. Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. Overview. On a quiet farm, young Fern Arable saves a runt piglet from being slaughtered, naming him Wilbur and raising him with tender care. When Wilbur is sold to her uncle's neighboring farms, he faces loneliness in his new pen until he befriends Charlotte, a wise and compassionate gray spider, who lives in the barn doorway. As Wilbur grows and learns of his likely fate as a Christmas ham, Charlotte devises a clever plan to save him by weaving miraculous words into her web. Review. This is my 5th read-through of the book, but it's separated by a lot of years. I had read this twice in 4th grade and 5th grade for a book competition called Clue Me In. I liked the story back then, but reading it 4 times in 2 years, I was fine with not picking up again. Well, and then you have kids and want to share the books that you read that got you into reading, so you pick it back up. Well, the separation of 30 years helped in letting me enjoy it again and see some parts that I hadn't noticed before. I did a family reading to this that took a classical approach to the discussion. The kids enjoyed the talking animals and the inclusion of Fern as the savior of Wilbur. There was some discussion that the book engages in well in whether or not Fern can hear the animals talk. Kids seem to always side with the answer yes to that question. The characters are well written, and while there is some sense of drama, it's set against the slow pace of both farm life and the change of seasons. The description of weather and nature that was lost on young me was much more appreciated by adult, mature me. White likes to use long lists for slight comedic effect, and reading them out loud was a lot of fun. An item of note is that White doesn't redeem his characters. The old sheep remains surly, but does entice Templeton to go to the fair to help. Templeton is definitely one who never falters from his character. He is selfish and only helps when there's something in it for him. That being said, both kids and adults seem to like Templeton, and even admitting this, I'm not sure exactly why. It might be that he's naughty in a consistent way that makes you roll your eyes and chuckle. Two characters that I had a different take this time around was Wilbur and Fern. As far as Wilbur goes, he doesn't showcase anything that makes him to be thought of as a good friend for Charlotte to make over him as. Wilbur just desires a friend, but his relationship is very one-sided with Charlotte. He's always asking Charlotte to do things for him, or teaching him things, or sing to him. Other than the ending, Wilbur doesn't quite do anything for Charlotte or engage her in a way that shows as much friendship as she does for him. I'm sure this is sacrilege in some way, and probably a point being made by White. It would have been nice to have Wilbur show some qualities that would help him be thought of as some pig or radiant. The other factor that was lost on me is how Fern changed so suddenly at the fair. For as intense as Fern was for Wilbur and the excessive amount of time she spent at the farm, the time she chose to go off for the boy was oddly chosen. Again, this is probably on purpose by White to show the change in Fern, although as an adult, this turned me off to her a bit. The animated movie actually changes this, and it's understandable why the decision was made with this. Again, probably sacrilege, but a detail that passed by young me completely the other 4 times I read it. Overall, this was a joy to read again, and especially sharing it with the audience of my own children. It's clear why the book has stood the test of time and has become some book. Final grade, A. The Breath of Creation by C.S. Johnson. Overview. Aerie St. Cloud struggles to recover from severe injuries and haunting memory gaps amid escalating tension. Reunited with space pirate Captain Exxon, whose rebellion challenges the regime's control, she navigates a web of secrets, personal flaws, and looming war. As old enemies close in and alliances fracture, the pair must confront deception and their deepening bond to avert global chaos. The second installment in the Divine Space Pirate trilogy blends high-stakes science fiction romance with themes of faith, freedom, and redemption. Review. What C.S. Johnson did to me with the ending of the first book in this series was a crime, but in such a good way. So this year I had to continue the series to see if I could get my fix of romance in a sci-fi setting. The story picks back up right where the first one left, and with the ending of the first, I was nervous that the character of Aerie would change and the enemies become lovers stories would repeat, or worse, that hatred would set in more. Joyously, this was not the case, and the flow of the story continues in the way that kept tension, but also kept romantic entanglement of Aerie and Exton. This book has a focus on the relationship, of course, but a majority of it is the conflict between the two military units. As with the first, I'm not exactly sure of the totality of the world changed in this post-apocalyptic setting, and the military actions tend to not go too long into detail. Exton's pregnant sister flies into danger, and it seems to just be a thing that's okay in the rebellion. Johnson is best with her prose, and there are a few lines I underline as being the perfect collection of words to highlight the relationship between the two main characters. An inclusion of a third possible love interest made me nervous of a Twilight love triangle, but that comparison was not needed here. Johnson also keeps her streak alive on endings that leave mouths agape, so I guess I'm forced to continue the series. Overall, I enjoyed the story. The plot was a little weak on the military sci-fi description, and honestly, I would have liked a little bit more love dialogue between Aerie and Exton, but being a fan of reading about characters who are actually in love and love each other, and not just in lust with each other, this story continues to scratch that itch. Final grade, B. Revelation Space by Alastair Reynolds. Overview. On the distant planet Resurgam, archaeologist Dan Sylvester pursues forbidden excavations into the ruins of the extinct American civilization, seeking answers to their sudden annihilation nearly 1 million years ago. Aboard a vast light-hugger starship, the ruthless Ultra crew, led by Ilya Voloyeva, hunts for advanced weaponry while harboring dark secrets of their own. Meanwhile, assassin Anna Karori is recruited for a perilous mission that draws her into the orbit of these converging forces. Review. It was a good thing that I read this with a friend to make sure I hadn't been hit on the head and didn't think I was going crazy with all the issues I had with this book. My friend enjoyed it and started the next book as I slogged my way to the end, kicking and screaming. He admitted he saw some of the issues I'd brought up, but enjoys the space opera over things like good characters or compelling plot or feeling like 700-page books should not get going halfway through. While I didn't absolutely hate the book, there wasn't enough for me to enjoy it in the genre I love best. Reynolds used his scientific background to craft a world that deals with the rarity in space opera sci-fi, and that's a lack of faster-than-light travel, FTL. This adds to a type of time dilation that the readers has to keep track of, and is somewhat of an element in the story. Reynolds also used the lack of alien contact as a plot point that I think would have worked out well in the hands of someone who could write characters that were worth caring about. From the science fiction perspective, this has some high marks on setting up the big picture of the universe. And where it comes crashing down to the planet, is the abysmal characters put forward. There are 3 plots that converge, each with its own character focus, and I'm not sure who exactly the main character is. I did not care about any of them, and did not find either of the 2 main-ish characters, Sylvester and Corey, to have any redeeming qualities to get me to like them. It seems like many of the characters are there just to infodump background, plot, and actions of off-screen characters onto readers. Characters do not engage in believable dialogue and go on for extended periods of time, even in the face of adversaries. Many times, characters will have stuff explained to them for long, drawn-out periods, and then right when it's time for revelation, the character will receive it, but the reader won't. There is not really an unfolding of a mystery. With so many plot points, it's hard to know which one I'm supposed to be caring about. There are other characters and settings that I wasn't sure why I needed to care or why they were there. Sylvester's character has a revelation about his backstory that's done about 3/4 of the way through the book, and it didn't seem to matter at all that much. And it's in the midst of a wedding that just pops up all of a sudden. The worst is the captain for the Nostalgia for Infinity ship, along with the first mate, Viola. There's no real answer on where the ship came from, how it got the payload it did, why it's important, or what orders it's under. The plot is also hurt by the lack of quality characters. Halfway through the book, I was still waiting for the plot to reveal itself. I found myself asking, why am I even reading this book? As in, am I supposed to care about the missing aliens, or the assassination attempts, or the ship with the world-ending weapons on it, or the colony's survival? I had no clue where I was being pointed to, and this resulted in being confused about what was going on and what the focus was. On top of the relativity of time, this did not help the fact. As for the ending, it was okay. It had some aspect that were slightly unique. However, the motive given why a certain faction was engaging in mass genocide didn't quite answer the next question of, but how does this help accomplish their ultimate goal? And seems to be a hypocritical quagmire that this extremely intelligent force should have. Plus the idea of kill it all rather than maybe we can figure this out in 3 billion years we have before we have to face the issue seems like an obvious question that doesn't even have a hand wave away answer to. So while I didn't hate this book and it did have some good sci-fi aspects, the lack of quality characters and the plotting plot made me not like this book that a number of people seem to really enjoy. I doubt I will continue the series. Final grade, D. Prince Caspian by C.S. Lewis. Overview. A year after their adventure in Narnia, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy are pulled back from the dreary English railway station into a magical world they once ruled. They find Narnia transformed, centuries have passed, and ancient ruins overgrown, and the land oppressed by the tyrannical Telmarine king Miraz, who usurped the throne and seeks to eliminate his young nephew, the rightful heir, Prince Caspian. Fleeing for his life, Caspian blows Queen Susan's ancient horn, summoning unexpected aid from the children who were once kings and queens, and awakening forces of old Narnia. Review. The all-out reading of the family continues with the Narnia series. I'm not sure if Caspian is any fan's favorite, but that's not to say it's bad. The story does have a bit of a pacing issue, especially at the beginning. The section of Caspian being positioned into the story through an infodump story by a dwarf can feel like half the story is at a standstill until you're waiting to catch up to where the 4 children are in the story. And finally, the turncoats and the ending really flies to the finish. However, all that to say that Lewis continues to write a world in a style that balances the traditional English attitudes and the pacing of the dramatic story. Where Lewis tends to entice children into the story is the wealth of the charm from these side characters. Reapy Cheap and Nickabrick stand out, and the character development of Nickabrick and fun alliteration exclamations were fun to hear. As a father and reader, it's fun to develop the voices for the characters, and this seems to be made for reading out loud. Parallels abound with allusions to the working of Christ in the story. Where Wardrobe had the big one, our family enjoyed thinking about how different interactions with Aslan matched to the story of Jesus during his earthly ministry. A bit of an issue with the pacing, but still Lewis' world of wonder and final grade, A-. The Clouds by Aristophanes. Overview. In debt-ridden Athens, Strepsiades despairs over his extravagant son's lavish spending and seeks a clever escape from his creditors. He enrolls in the unconventional tinkery run by the eccentric philosopher Socrates, hoping to master the art of persuasive sophistry and wrong-footed logic. There he concludes that the ethereal chorus of clouds who serve as the school's divine patrons and embodying the shifting winds of the new intellectual trends. Review. This was my first taste of Greek comedy writing, and this was a shocking read. While comedy in the classical sense means a story with a good ending, as opposed to a tragedy with a negative ending, and about 2 pages in, you're greeted with a fart joke. One of many you'll encounter. At the very least, we realize that civilization may advance, but people remain people throughout the centuries. I did not like Aristophanes' writing or his plotting. It took a while to get to the point he was at to start to make the point. The crass and vulgar jokes were a slog to get through. Now, considering that this is probably one of the earliest comedies to make these jokes, and the tropes were not even tropes yet, some deference should be given. There were some clever jokes, even though they were my style of comedy, that did get a laugh. I was reading the William Arrowsmith translation, and what he did, as he says in the introduction and notes, is provide stand-ins in the English that the Greeks had. So what sounded like vaudevillian slapstick and humor was a product of translation, but also a good decision to give the readers a solo English text, a taste of what was being done to the Greeks. A friend that I have says that he evaluates a book on whether or not it accomplishes the goal it sets out to accomplish. In that, I see what Aristophanes was trying to do. I'm not learned enough to know whether it's being serious or parodying the response to the claims of the dangers of Socrates and the new philosophy of sophistry arising in Greece. So I see the point, and sadly the humor got in the way for me. 3,000 years of distance, I'm going to take the blame for this, as I don't think people will be reading my jokes 3,000 years from now. Final grade, D. The Frogs by Aristophanes. Overview. The god Dionysus, despairing over the decline of great tragedy in Athens following recent losses among its master playwrights, disguises himself as Hercules and descends into the underworld by his clever slave Xanthias. Their perilous journey involves crossing a lake ferried by Charon, enduring the relentless croaking of a chorus of sacred frogs, and navigating the chaotic realm of the dead. There, Dionysus becomes entangled in a fierce rivalry between two legendary poets vying for supremacy in Hades. Review. Where I was ready for the humor from reading The Clouds and prepped myself for the type of crass humor style, what I was not prepared for was the slow pacing that it took Aristophanes to get to the point. While the frogs is one of his most important messages, who are we to be, people of Greece? He asks the question, will dramatic tragedy be our teacher and save us? I feel like dividing the story in two would get me to the same spot and I would lose nothing. The William Arrowsmith translation again brings the humor into the English from the Greek. The slapstick nature of Dionysus and his slave feel very much like Abbott and Costello meets the Three Stooges. If there were their own story, I would say this play is ancient Greece's Saturday morning Looney Tunes version. But my goodness, the pacing to get there and the main point made this such a struggle to get through. Divide the story into two and do that 2 more times, and then you're there, and I'm not sure I lose much. But as my friend asked, did the author accomplish what he set out to do? I do believe so, and it's the slowest road to Hades to get to. Blame should be shifted 3,000 years forward to the reader for this take and not 3,000 years back. I'm ready for some Greek poetry to cheer me up after all this comedy. Final grade, D-. Shoot the Devil, 10 Tales of Humans Defeating the Demonic, edited by Eric Postma. Overview. In this anthology edited by Eric Postma offers 10 tales from authors as they explore people confronting literal demonic forces across diverse settings, from serial killers' basements and the weird West to quiet small towns and ancient mysteries. Review. I'm usually a fan of indie short story collections, as it provides a number of introductions to new authors in the indie space and to test out which writing styles, characters, settings would be good to check out. Plus, the collections of the whole, based on the editor's pick, provides an encompassed viewpoint that can be interesting and also point to the talent and need for indie authors. The initial premise of Postma's collection is that evil should be vanquished, and done especially in the collective Christian author viewpoint, hence the Shoot the Devil. While this collection only uses a gun 1, maybe 2 times, and the collection seems to be an opportunity for a number of authors to try and hook with a pre-existing storyline character, and it feels really disjointed from the short story perspective. A number of other stories were not that good, and the good ones were okay. There was nothing that really stood out in this collection that made me immediately search out the author like the indie collections have. The following are the stories and my short thoughts on them. An Exorcism for the Demon by Daniel Humphreys, psychic detective who gets kidnapped by a serial killer. The character is part of the author's pre-existing series whose power seems to be held back for no real reason, and there is no allowance for tension to be built that was available to an interesting setup for a story. Final grade, C. Phantom Ridge, from the case files of Virgil Everness by N.R. Lapointe, a Western setting where a husband and his psychic wife uncover the demons taking over a small town. I liked the characters in the setting. A husband and wife demon hunter couple who loved each other was refreshing, and they actually shot the devil. Final grade, A-. Fell Beast by John C. Wright. A woman has a battle of wits with a demon vampire. A battle of wits with some interesting aspects of the vampire monster and an okay conclusion, but left a lot to be desired. C+. Who Rules the World by L. Jaggy Lamplighter. An Illuminati meeting that might be its last. Another author who is using a pre-existing story where a lot more had to be done for me to care or help me with who anyone was. There was not enough comedy where it could and tried to exist, and there was too serious takes for something that would have made the point with the comedy it was failing to use. It takes a lot for me not to like a story about a secret organization controlling the world. Final grade, D. Wolf in the Winds by James Piles. A sheriff hires a psychic detective woman to hunt a dimensional werewolf. I really hated the story. For a collection of books held by a loose confederation of Christian authors, this one especially had a lot of cursing and taking the Lord's name in vain, and unnecessarily. The female detective had some interesting qualities, but the focus wasn't much on her, and the story was over with sequel bait that wasn't needed. Final grade, F. Game Warden, A Tale of Peter Bishop by Russell Newquist. A man tries to save camping Boy Scouts as they're transported through dimensional portals after encountering a fae. I think this was part of another series. I was again lost because of that. The Boy Scout aspect could have been done a lot better with more time, and the kids just seemed to be okay with everything happening to them. This was quite confusing and what was happening and why it was in this collection. Final grade, C-. The Silver String Job by Stephen G. Johnson. A mage pulls out all the stops to track down the entity who might have his soul. The setup for this was decent, and the world building had elements that I would have enjoyed reading more in a larger story. There could have been a bit more explanation of the makeup of the world and the reason that the mage is on the hunt for what he is. The ending kind of peters out. Final grade, D+. Last Chance by Michael Gallagher. A priest helps two men who return to settle a score with a monster who took their friend years ago. There were aspects of this I liked. Another story where a devil is shot using a gun. The haunted house aspect could have used more. The setup is what took the majority of the story, and the ending could have used more of a focus. Final grade, C-. To Catch a Monster by Declan Finn. An ageless demon hunter is fated to take out monsters and rescue a woman who wants to know more. The overall story is just okay. This again seems to be a pre-existing character, but at least the character was interesting and someone I probably wouldn't mind reading about. The problem I had with it is it seems to be a story only to promote the character and not be part of a self-contained story. Final grade, C. Eyes Have Not Seen by Corey Comstock. A man uncovers the dark arts but has a change of heart, sets him down a completely different path. My Protestant bias is probably going to count against this one, but at least in the world the story occupied, I understood the end. I just didn't understand what world or when or anything was happening. The mad scientist I thought was in a fantasy world, but then it seems to be in our world where he once was saved out of darkness, but stumbles into helping the light. Mary turns out to be the greater focus than Jesus here. See, I told you I couldn't be helped. Final grade, D. Overall, I was disappointed with the collection, and while the editor seemed to want to unite around punching the devil in the nose, the stories picked seemed to be, check out the full explanation of my story in my series I cared about more. Final grade, D. Lifebinder by Blake Carpenter. Overview. In the matriarchal world of Agarth, where ancient spell swords, magical blades bound to bloodlines, wield extraordinary powers, the search intensifies for the legendary Lifebinder, the sword of mending capable of defying disease and even reversing death. Following the vengeful path forged by Ingra and her deadly blade Deathbringer, new bearers and ambitious clans pursue this elusive weapon, long hidden after the brutal war that saw it seized from its previous matriarch. Alliances fracture amid secrets of blood sorcery, lost histories, and rising threats from forgotten enemies. Review. I really end up enjoying Blake Carpenter's first book in the Spellsword saga, Deathbringer. I like the characters, the plot, and the setting. Now with the second book in the series, I was impressed with how well Carpenter expanded the world he set up in the first book. Within the first several chapters, the world unfolds more in a way that is logical within the confines of the previous story. Where the first story had those moments of steampunk-esque qualities, here they are embraced more in both setting and style. I was really impressed that Carpenter took the time and was confident in his first story to hold back this unfolded world for the sequel. This makes the sequel a well-constructed world where the feeling of course it is that way, naturally plays out, and I quite enjoyed it. As for the plot, the continuation of following a wiser Inga, having been battle-hardened and diving headfirst into the political world, didn't just live happily ever after at the end of Book 1. She continues her training with sword mechanics. She is still dealing with the psychological damage of the eraser of her previous life, and now the death of others and the ability to raise the dead to do her bidding. The politics of this world not stopping just because of what happened in the previous book. It continues in a very fluid and easy-to-read way. A greater addition of the characters were added, and at times the path of connections were confusing to me. As I tended not to be consistently in a fantasy novel, the addition of so many characters and their motives were harder to track for me. There are some interesting ones, including additional sword bearers. Again, the opening up of those type of characters makes all the sense of what is desired by a reader who enjoyed the first book. As for Kale, Ingrid's love interest, he sadly takes more of a backseat support role in this one. With the first book, Kale was along for the ride, and while not the main character, he was important, and his relationship to other characters provided some good tragic motivation. Here, Kale practically falls off into the fetch quest side character, spending much of his time away from Inga. This also lessens their growing romantic relationship, and a revelation towards the end of the book was surprising to Inga, but wouldn't be surprising to the reader. However, because of the time away from each other, the build-up romance was lessened. Even speaking to Deathbringer seemed to not be done a lot in this book. I was hoping for more from these two characters. The plot started off really strong, and there is an included element of the matriarchal religion element. This was a really good, and again, grows the element of the world. However, I'm not sure what the religious elements are. It may be that the matriarchal society is the result of religious beliefs that are held by many in this world, but I'm not sure what they are. Here, the church functions as another political element that is similar to the Bene Gesserit from Dune. I would have also liked to know more of the theology and see its result in the why the world's make-up is the way it is, but that might be saved for book 3. While the plot is fine, the stakes are lessened from that of the first book. The first half of the book makes clear that the revelation of the story arc is coming, and towards the later part, there are a lot of scenes and character changes that lessens the impact and bogs the story down a bit, and I felt myself reading slower in that part of the book because of it. The combat still remains a realistic, descriptive aspect of the story, although less direct fighting happens than in the first one. This seems to be more of who are the pawns and who are the players of the game politics than the previous book. Inga is a clearly tragic hero that I enjoyed reading. Her fate versus free will story unfolds even more here in such a smart way. While the characters got a little confusing, the story dragged a little bit 3/4 in, I still enjoyed the setting and the plot. If another story is to be written, I would definitely check that out. Again, Carpenter writes very smartly for a second book in the series, and shows that he's talented enough to take his time with his world and revelations and trust in a good story, which I would say this one is. Final grade, B+. Starship Troopers by Robert A. Heinlein. Overview. In a future where citizenship and the right to vote are earned only through voluntary federal service, young Juan Johnny Rico enlists in the mobile infantry on a whim, embarking on a grueling rigors of boot camp and advanced training in powerful armor suits. As humanity wages an interstellar war against a formidable arachnid enemy, Rico rises through the ranks, facing intense combat and the harsh realities of military life. And then a constituency review. This is my second read-through, as naive 7th grade Patrick all those years ago watched the movie version and bought the book with Casper Van Dien on it. Well, that young man learned his lesson of a movie adaptation of a novel versus a novel that day. And while the lad got over his disappointment, he didn't hate it at the time. Now, the mature and well-read man cracks open the book with the entire collection of the troublesome Robert A. Heinlein in his collection, and I get to read it along with some good friends. The joys of living in the future. Check out the book discussion with Periapsis Press. No comparison will be made here to the movie. Heinlein does a masterful job of world crafting and making it interesting. As someone who doesn't care much about world building in spite of the plot, this was a rare instance where it worked well. Heinlein crafts a world where world war and juvenile crime launched a new revolution, and what followed was a military-type society where citizenship, voting and holding office, is upheld as a high virtue, but also optional. From there, we follow military infantry trooper John E. Rico from his enlistment to his first major campaign in the Bug War, which only counts for about 2 chapters out of this short book. However, what's a subtext in the story is Heinlein weaves into the future world of the 1950s and asks about what a high-trust society that values not direct democracy, but earned citizenship, and where corporal punishment of both children and adults is viewed as beneficial and taken very seriously by those who in that hierarchical relationship to the individual. Within that, we then see the childhood to adulthood growth that is a simple soldier like Rico and how he experiences it, and sets in a world of alien and war, colonization and exploration, and a solidified humanity of capitalism and military preference, but without military dominance. This could be the classical dystopian utopian world based on the reader's presuppositions. And while Heinlein didn't view this as his ideal society, he does such a good job of presenting this world and asking the question of what would it look like if this was the case? While some people might not like the philosophy in the world building, and another might equally not enjoy the limited details of what citizenship implies, and a real sense of story closure, I believe an astute reader, taking his or her time with the story presented, can find a lot of value in the story. Politics, the military, child-rearing, fatherhood, and coming of age in the 1950s future world where you fight some big bugs for the right to be a citizen. What's the matter? Don't you want to live forever? Final grade, A. Theogony and Works and Days by Hesiod. Overview. Hesiod, Theogony, traces the origin of the cosmos from primordial chaos, charting the births, alliances, and fierce struggles among the gods, titans, and monsters that culminate in Zeus's triumphant establishment of divine order. In Works and Days, the poet addresses his wayward brother, blending mythological tales like those of Prometheus and Pandora with stern counsel on the necessity of honest labor and justice in a world of hardship. Through practical guidance on farming seasons, seafaring, and daily life, Hesiod contrasts idleness with virtuous toil. Review. Theogony. Continuing the tradition of Greek poets by invoking the Muses, Hesiod gives us the semi-creation account of the Greek pantheon and the origin of men and evil and the genealogy of the gods. Hesiod is credited, at least to our knowledge, of providing the well-known origin stories of the gods and the Greek myths, while the poetry, at least translated, doesn't stand out all that well. It is interesting that Greek saw order, design, and hierarchy in the universe and translated from the theology to the societal among the polis and the family. Works and Days. A personal grudge from Hesiod to his brother, but it reads like a book of sayings or Poor Richard's Almanac. It contains common planting tips for agriculture, but also how best to live among each other in the budding city-state. The suggested laws have a ring of Old Testament, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and attempts to provide a means for violence to be lessened in this new blended society, and where laws and politics and good work ethic is a means to lessen violence. This flows really well from the Oresteia, especially the Libation Bearers and the Eumenides by Aeschylus. Not so much as a poetry read, but interesting to see the real-life, day-to-day maturations of typical ancient Greek life. Final grade, B-. Blind Devotions, A Tale of the Van Meter Visitor by Drago. Overview. In the hidden corners of our world lurk cryptids, obscure creatures long dismissed as myth, yet occasionally glimpsed and even photographed. Their existence defying scientific proof. Part of the acclaimed Systema Paradoxa series championing such beings, Drago's novel involves Hank, a reclusive man harboring a profound secret in his secluded hideaway. When young Alex unexpectedly seeks his aid one fateful night, accompanied by her extraordinary pet, a surviving remnant tied to the infamous 1903 Van Meter visitor sighting, she upends his solitary life. Review. I enjoyed a previous installment from the Systema Paradoxa series. A different author takes a different cryptid and puts their own spin with their own standalone story. This review will stand on its own and not be a commentary on the entire series. I hadn't heard of the Van Meter visitor before, so halfway through I felt I was at a good place to dig into the real story and see what the author was drawing from. Within Drago's story, he borrowed heavily from the actual events and inserts several POV characters. The previous story took the concepts of Goatman and put a murder mystery plot spin on it. So this was as neat a story to undertake. However, where the story rises and falls is on the characters. Hank, son of the town's drunk, is a friend with the blind girl, Alexandra. Alexandra teaching him how to be an author and write stories, and Hank gives her time away from her overbearing aunt. As characters of the story that interact with the cryptid story, they are fine. Some revelation about certain characters pretty much work within the story's explanation. What tends to not work are the believability. Hank being an author seems almost like a self-insert of the author here. But Hank never shows any proclivities to being intelligent, writing anything, or being someone who stands out for Alex to choose to focus on him. Half the story is finished by the time you get to the cryptid portion, and it meanders for far too long without doing much with the characters. Not to get into spoilers, the storyline does have a few interesting explanations within the real story, but the naming the cryptid and some of the relationship forming are eye-rolling. It was nice to see that some of the town folks aren't written like backwater hillbillies who just hate everybody for no reason. But some of them do without reason. Overall, it's not a terrible story, with some good work on including elements of the real cryptid story, but not an overly exciting one. Final grade, C+. Last Summer, A Tale of Glawackus by Jacob Jones-Goldstein. Overview. Goldstein weaves a tale around the Glawackus, an enigmatic northern devil cat that terrorized New England folklore in the 1930s. Set against a hot, humid Long Island summer that feels deceptively idyllic, the story follows the challenges of growing up amid a whisper of something predatory prowling the woods. Blending coming-of-age tensions with supernatural dread, this novella explores the blurred lines between legend and reality when an ancient beast stirs once more. Review. It starts with Mighty Mighty Boss Tones and ends with Rush, a story treading on 90s nostalgia. Well, at least it's not the 80s nostalgia. Another entry into the cryptid series of Systema Paradoxa, the third for me, and this was another new cryptid for me. The Glawackus is more of a general cryptid and not one with a real high-profile story like Mothman, so I was wondering what the author would do, seeing as the previous entry used Goatman to solve a murder mystery. What rendered here is a pretty mediocre story that is essentially an animal mixed with an exposition dump, and the final choices that don't make much sense. Woodrow, Sean, and Kevin, the character stories, are friends who run over the star cryptid and take it home. I was hoping it wasn't going to be a cryptid becomes dog-like character and that a cult wants back. Instead, we get a story that meanders to normal teenagers. An encounter with a rogue police officer makes this seem more like it's going to turn into the hide the monster like E.T.-like story. Instead, the police officer thinks that kidnapping some kids and retiring from his job duties is the best way to choose his successor. Other than the encounter with a cryptid later in the story, there's not much here. It's a quick read, but only because it's short and moves quick without much there. There is some attempt at character development, but only as much as you get in a half-hour vignette series. There wasn't enough meat here, and the real stereotypical setup of hit thing with car encounter. The cryptid has one interesting reveal part, but it's almost as if the author was embarrassed to have such an odd monster to work with. Sadly, not much here. Final grade, D+. Three Black Nights, an urban fantasy horror triple feature by T.J. Marquis. Overview. Sometimes the ordinary world fractures, plunging everyday people into the nights of unrelenting terror and supernatural peril. In this chilling urban fantasy horror anthology, T.J. Marquis presents three standalone tales: a van driver navigating a zombie-infested apocalypse, a midnight errand for a sinister death-drinking fae, and a harrowing confrontation with an ancient, seductive evil lurking below a remote manor. Blending visceral dread, atmospheric tensions, and everyman protagonists facing unimaginable darkness, these stories explore the thin veil between reality and nightmare. A gripping triple feature that delivers creeping horror and pulse-pounding scares, perfect for readers craving monstrous threats. Review. Having read several anthologies and several indie authors, you usually have a few you like, a few you don't, and maybe one or two you really like. With only 3 short stories here, the distribution should be 1, 1, and 1. However, Marquis has chosen 3 excellent short stories that shows his prowess as an author. This doesn't fall into the cringe exercise of throwing out some second-rate story that really introduces you to the fuller series the author wants you to buy. Marquis has carefully chosen 3 stories that shares somewhat of a theme, but are different enough that you don't feel like you're reading the same story over 3 times. Spice of the Apocalypse. A zombie apocalypse where everyone knows what a zombie is, but also zombies are mostly there to only set the scene for the real story. While main character Ronaldo isn't going to be on anyone's bedroom poster, his simple nature and goal is what a one-off episode of an exciting zombie apocalypse novel would focus on to give the audience a breather and end up being the talk of the entire show. The choices made are smart and consistent with the nature of the character. The use of the Aesop fable plays an amazing part in driving the theme home, especially in the revelation scene. And what's left with a satisfying story is the ability to discuss if Ronaldo did the right thing at the end. This setup of the other 2 stories showed Marquis as a talented writer who's able to take a non-hero character and making the story revolve around him that was exciting and insightful is clear. As with other stories in the collection, you also get a taste of Marquis' style and skill of giving you just enough of the world to give you what you need to know, and almost frustratingly wanting to know more about the larger picture, but frustrating in a good way. This one was an A-. Den of the Necrolord. This story showcases the skill of crafting a world that is larger than what the author is going to give you. It's a short story, so you're going to forgive the need to unpack the world, but Marquis mixes the strangeness of the world to hide story elements that brings the final reveal to satisfaction that you weren't expecting, but you should have. Another great side character in a supernatural mundane world where there might be a business for vampire accountants or demon lords filing for 501c3 status. Marquis has a great pacing here, and a man undercover in the bad guy's lair, and some amazing prose with strong adjectives to make the story feel visceral, angst, and highlighting the grosser points of horror. Again, in a good way. Final grade, A+. The Beauty Below. At this point in the game, I'm trying to guess what genre and setting Marquis has me in at the beginning. There's almost a literal sand screen in front of the reader, and I went from extremes of post-apocalyptic to alien invasion to Lovecraft, and I have to say, I really did want some more for understanding just a bit more about the world. However, at this 3rd story, Marquis has enough trust garnered that I was willing to follow him through the story. Another good set of characters and setting. While there were a couple places I didn't think main characters made an accurate to form discussion, and the ending had an element of letting the fuller story off the hook, I had too much fun reading this to care. The side characters was interesting enough, and I kept trying to redeem him through my own will, and that's how you know you're enjoying your book. Grade A-. These 3 stories are why indiepub is a force to contend with. Marquis not only picked 3 great stories to string together, but they were so well picked and that it read like they could have been part of the same world or written within each other in mind. This is clearly going to get me to read the full novels that Marquis has out, and I hope others would pick up this collection of stories to see not just what indiepub has to offer, but what a talented author who knows how to write a story well. He gives the audience exactly what they need without spoon-feeding excessive detail for the sake of getting more words on a page. Definitely a recommendation and a good price for it. Final grade, A+. The Moon is the Harsh Mistress by Robert A. Heinlein. Overview. In a lunar colony exploited as a penal outpost by Earth's authoritarian Lunar Authority, resourceful computer technician Manuel Garcia O'Kelly Davis becomes entangled in a growing revolutionary underground when he discovers that the colony's central computer, Mike, has unexpectedly achieved self-awareness. The two form an unlikely alliance with fiery activist Wyoming Knott and idyllic professor Bernardo de la Paz. Together, they orchestrate a daring bid for independence, blending guerrilla tactics, clever propaganda, and ballistic strategy in high-stakes rebellion. Review. What if Ayn Rand wrote sci-fi? Atlas would be shrugging the moon rather than Earth, and Heinlein would be the nun de plume, or maybe the other way around. After rereading Starship Troopers right before, I wanted to pick up one of the other 3 books that Heinlein said that defined his philosophy. Starship Troopers, The Moon is the Harsh Mistress, and Stranger in a Strange Land being the 3 books. I liked what he did in Starship Troopers, and thought that even though there was a similar focus of philosophy first within the scope of intergalactic army story, here the philosophy first dragged more elements of a story that were presented first, but became too much focused on the philosophy. Hence my comparison to Rand's Atlas Shrugged, where the plot comes to a standstill with the philosophy, although Heinlein would be more anarchistic than Rand. So this should be right up my alley, but I felt pretty let down by it. The story starts off amazingly well. For 1966, Heinlein's use of AI computer Mycroft is believable and fits well within the time of AI cusp of 2025. The main character, Manny, feels like a Wilson from 1984 type character. A middle-of-the-road worker and man that doesn't make him heroic hero man, but smart in other ways, and his relationship with the AI computer sets him up as likable and worth following. Heinlein has his lunar-type dialect that is read into the text, where Manny is pretty much narrating the book. This is a little reminiscent of Nasat language of the Droog speak in A Clockwork Orange. However, this one is more stunted English than particularly another tongue. This helps the read always maintain the other nature that the moon population has apart from the Earth that sets up the rebellion storyline. We get a few other characters like Wyo, who, for Heinlein supposedly being an antiquated misogynist, he gave her a significant role in the story. Professor de la Paz, aka Prof, tends to take center stage about 1/3 of the way into the book. While the AI relationship with Manny allows the people of the moon to get a big advantage in the rebellion, it is Prof who leads and establishes the anarcho-capitalistic philosophy of the rebellion, the demands of the Earth, and the formation of the government after. When the rebellion takes off and Prof takes center stage, this is where you tend to get your John Galt-type speeches. Manny falls into a second-in-command Secretary of War, co-ambassador to Earth, that keeps the single point of view going forward. Toward the end of the book, Manny takes more central of a role again, but Mycroft, the AI, takes a lot more of the back seat, and you miss some of the interplay of Manny and the computer's relationship, although there's still moments of slight humor. The ending feels very rushed, and I was turning pages thinking the book must be missing pages, as there didn't seem to be enough to wrap things up. There's no cathartic experience, and when the title gets its inclusion at the end, which was something done by the editors and not by Heinlein, who was used to his titles getting nicked from his book, this seems to really shut down at the end. Here's my problem with the book. It gives me too much of a story and a relationship between characters at the start. This caused me to think that this was a different book than Starship Troopers, which was philosophical commentary set in space. Then when this book switches to the more philosophical moments, they are either plainly stated or they're not carried out far enough within the story and the world. Sure, you have Prof lecturing the politicians that they can have the representative government if they can keep it small, but whatever you do, do not go about funding via taxes, as that is theft and extortion. But that's all that it is, a lecture. The subtlety that was found in Troopers isn't present here. The story then attempts to conclude on an action set piece, but that has lost a lot of tension due to the middle section and the understanding of how the story uses the AI computer. I'm all for having my sci-fi being filled to the brim with my brand of self-governance anarcho-capitalism. I just don't like the lecture nature, especially when a more story-focused narrative is present to me at the beginning. The modern-day sci-fi, the lecture is all that's given. The story here is worth reading, but needs to be a more story mixed with my Second American Revolution on the Moon by anarchists who love to own their property and peacefully trade. It's not a bad book, and I'll continue to check out Heinlein's work, especially Stranger in a Strange Land, if only to spite the libs who hate him. Final grade, B-. Record of the Paladins, Book of Ivon and Ivoire by B.P. McCoppin. Overview. Ivon endures a brutal upbringing under the ruthless colonel who exploits his rare gift for detecting lies to fuel a hunger for power in the world of unrelenting duty that leaves no room for anything else. Across the divide, young Ivoire grapples with her own ability to sense truth, only to be uprooted from her family and enrolled in a shadowy government academy for gifted children, plunging her into espionage and manipulation. When the Holy Order of the Paladins discovered these two uniquely talented individuals with complementary yet opposing gifts, so too does a lurking demonic army eager to rule the world. Of course. In this gripping second volume of the Record of the Paladins series, B.P. McCoppin intensifies the hidden war between divine warriors and infernal forces, blending high-stakes action, spiritual depth, and the timeless battle for souls. Review. Having really enjoyed the writing prose and the story set up by McCoppin in his first book, I was more than happy to have a second book in the series to read. Picking up on all the main story points from the first one, this shifts the focus more from Oliver to the new potential Paladins, Ivon and Ivoire. This was actually a little bit sad to me, but only because McCoppin did such a great job of endearing Oliver to me, but I can't fault him for writing one story too well. While two new characters are introduced, it's more Ivoire who is the lead character, and she is the only semi-tragic backstory as opposed to Ivon, who becomes a sort of villain doing evil and villainous things. Ivoire, who follows the tropes of the Eastern European spy from Ukraine, teams up with the Paladin Corps just under halfway through the book. Enough of her story is fleshed out to make you care about her as a character and understand her power and skills she will bring to the table. Sadly, there was no diner scene to emotionally wreck me, in a good way, like in the first book, but different experiences may be had by different readers. Ivon's stories is followed, although more sporadically, and there's just not enough good to be eked out of his character to want me to root for him to be included among the Paladins. Now, this may make for a good plot point, but the author does have characters discuss Paladins who come in as atheists. A little more lost this time is the overall plot. The evil senator, who knew politicians are literally demons, rears her ugly head again, and there's a few mini-missions that are resolved quite quickly. A few more lore points are added to the world building. A priest who is essentially the angry police lieutenant that's going to shut down the program that's known to be working shows up for a mission and is quickly turned around. Finally, the ending moves from the Ivon Ivoire storyline to the revelation very quickly. It's not that it's not earned, it just turns the tide very quickly, although there is a question asked that lends to, for me, a funny outcome. But to some readers, they might be confused why a character in the story would ask the question. The final revelation that lends itself to the next book had me saying, she's going after both things? Oh no, she didn't. While the Book of Oliver, for me, was an amazing read, I had to try to be fair and not let all my good feelings towards that cloud my reading of this book, for both good and bad. The focus away from Oliver is really hard to get through, and I have a feeling that adding more characters with the same type of storytelling might lead to too many characters and too often treading on the recruitment of broken characters. I'm also still not a big fan of Roland as an impervious tank of a man, nor his speech. Not that I don't love people quoting scripture a lot, I'm just not sold on the logic of doing so in battle. Even still, I enjoy the story and McCoppin's writing. He understands the world has both elements of good and evil, and some people can be demonically influenced and also just be evil people all on their own. I will be happy in continuing the series and other writings from this author. Final grade, B. After Moses, Prodigal by Michael F. Kane. Overview. A century after the AI Moses vanished, leaving humanity's solar system colonies depending on his irreplaceable technology, the dwarf planet has become the most populous world, a hub of desperate souls and syndicate-controlled underground cities. Captain Cole and his misfit crew of freelance ships, Sparrow, chase rumors of lost tech while navigating rising tensions that threaten interstellar war. When terrorist threats target vital gravity plate factories and personal secrets resurface, including a crew member's prodigal return to a troubled past, the stakes soar. Michael Kane's thrilling space western sequel blends high-octane adventure, found family dynamics, and themes of forgiveness in a gritty, Firefly-inspired future. Review. With the first book, I bought the rest of the series in hardcover after only reading 9 chapters. With book 2, it was a wise investment that has paid dividends in a great story with a well-paced plot and fantastic prose. Where book 1 contained a number of almost vignette stories that added to the whole story and set up the world, book 2 splits up characters to keep the pacing and change in setting to keep the readers interested. Kane knows how to handle his characters, as they are maturing with age or working as a team or being better versions of themselves, or trying to be. While the focus of the story, as seen in the cover, is focused on Grace, she is not a damsel in distress, and Davy is not a sniveling child that he once was. That's not to say they are perfect, and that allows for them to grow as characters, even during the story. While readers may feel the pace of the story is slower at the beginning half of the book, the ramp-up to the second half shows why the pacing was needed at the start. This is not to say that nothing happens, but the comparison to the second part and with the first book, there is a shift. Characters are not sacrificed for the plot, and the plot doesn't slow down for the sake of the characters. How characters learn new things or grow is all done as it's happening. There's not a seismic shift that happens in isolation after deep internal monologue. There's clear growth in the younger characters, but with a decision made by another character on the crew, it shifts her entire arc and realizes that there are people not written as monoliths, but act like real people. Addition of new people and understanding of them makes sense and are welcomed. No one has easy-to-guess decisions or free from repercussions when they make seemingly easier choices. My comment in the first book was that it was nice that there wasn't this giant overarching plot that needed 15 books and 1,000 pages between to get to the end. Well, in fact, Kane did it in 6 books. In this book, more of that bigger story unfolds. However, Kane earned the attention, and I even forgave the inclusion of a broken McCoppin puzzle piece that will unlock secret information. With the fun adventures and well-written people to follow, it adds to the fun of the story, and it doesn't become the sole driving force of the story. In fact, not having unlimited funds becomes an issue that makes the world feel real. My problem with the Expanse series is Holden and his crew never need provisions or purchase bullets for a ship. 2 items of note that were exceptional. The first is that the opening chapter entries are diary-like entries that describe the after effects of AI Moses up and leaving one random day. In book 1, these really helped build the world, and they were fun to read about what a Moses-built solar system looked like. In book 2, they do just the opposite. The tone is darker for Moses leaving, and the impending doom and the slow wind down of humanity's former sole reliance on the AI for its way of life in the universe is weighted even more here. Reading these were snapshots of dread and horror to come. I loved it. The second was the inclusion of the introduction of a few characters from a multi-generational line that occurs in a flashback. It does tie into the current story in a big way, but the quickness they were introduced and the conclusion of their story happens in the middle of the book and within maybe 50 pages. Roughly. Kane's writing shines here in making me care about them, seeing them for what they are and could have been, and ties the story to the character that comes through in the end. A character in distress needing forgiveness after confession and another fatherly character freely offering it shows not just character growth, but is the theme of the whole story. The story does not conclude at the reset. The story does not conclude at a reset. Each person on the ship is not who they are at the beginning, not all of it in the positive. Kane has a clear perspective, and if it wasn't clear from the first book, this book shows he knows where he's going, and he cares about the reader and having a good time. While I love the first book a lot, I really enjoyed this book as a different story, but in the same universe that the author believes in. I could not recommend this series more for those who enjoy sci-fi and are searching for a book where hope resides. Final grade, A+. The Shepherd Descends by J.A. Raithe. Overview. When a colossal alien ship decelerates and halts at the edge of the solar system after centuries of silent observations, 3 rival human factions, Earth's political elite, Mars-hardened colonists, and outer system outlaws scramble to make first contact. 17 representatives board their respective vessels, discovering not advanced gifts, but a crucible of trials crafted to assess humanity's character and worthiness for survival. As the test strips away pride, ambition, and illusion, tensions escalate amid profound revelations about what it means to be human. Review. I was interested in this first contact book from an indie author's point of view, as it involved different human factions attempting to make contact with alien visitors who were testing humanity. Sounded promising. I was overjoyed in reading this book. The format that Raithe has structured the novel in each chapter has an A and a B side, where humanity's point of view is represented in the A section, and the B side is from the shepherd alien point of view. It's clear from the start that the alien contact is superior from every species it has encountered, and very much so with respect to humanity. Humanity has broken free of being Earth only with the usual colonies of the asteroid belt and Mars. So a future humanity, but not one long removed from the present reality. The 3 aspects of humanity start as representing a very capitalistic system, the Earth and the Moon, military, Mars, and an anarchy open information society, the Belt. The leaders tend to be the focal point, with other members of the crew adding to the story. From the alien POV, from the moment of entry, every aspect becomes a test to see if humanity is able to be a place for shared life and tech of life forms waiting to make contact with an advanced species worthy and ready for the responsibility. Raithe does well in writing for the 4 different perspectives, and each flows from one to the other. He writes from a perspective seen in classic Doctor Who, where humanity is seen as being great and faulty and special and having lots of potential and being different from other alien species is here. There's no nihilism here. He doesn't slag on the religion or capitalism or freedom or a number of modern-day messaging. When switching to the Shepherd, there are a lot of statistics and percentages that readers might be tempted to skim over, but they reveal the uniqueness of humanity and unexpected findings the alien wasn't expecting. The alien internal monologue and recollection of flashbacks to previous first contacts that resulted poorly, fairly, or in suicides of the species of finding out they were not alone in the universe keeps the flow of that aspect of the story interesting and more than just computer-generated numbers. However, there were a bit too many times when the real test was about to begin was used as chapter ending. I was also hesitant that Reddit is still a thing in the future and aliens might learn all about humanity through it. I found myself flying through this book and really enjoying the hopeful viewpoint that is missing from modern sci-fi, where everything feels more like an Event Horizon hellscape. Raithe has some good prose with a favorite line of, "The vision clung to him, seductive as oxygen in a vacuum." My biggest complaint would be, without getting into spoilers, that Raithe almost hides a character in the background that plays an important part much later in the plot. Having the character sprinkled in a bit more would have added to the reveal. An astronomer at the beginning almost appeared as if she would be a main character from certain dialogue aspects, but she disappears after fulfilling her role in the story. Overall, I found myself really enjoying the story and would pick up other books by Raithe. This is a great example of indiepub being a resource to readers who reject the nihilism of modern day, reflected in the advanced society that would really have just destroyed itself with that type of worldview. With a worldview that allows for hopefulness, we are able to succeed well, and the author writes, humanity's failures did not isolate, they drew others closer. Final grade, A-. Atlas of World War II, history's greatest conflict revealed through rare wartime maps and new cartography by Stephen G. Hesop. Overview. This lavishly illustrated National Geographic Atlas presents World War II through an extraordinary collection of over 100 rare wartime maps, many reproduced for the first time, alongside newly created cartography using modern satellite data for enhanced terrain detail. From the invasion of Poland to the Pacific Theater offenses, Pearl Harbor, the Battle of the Bulge, and beyond, it charts key naval, land, and aerial campaigns with unprecedented clarity. Rare artifacts include Roosevelt's personal world maps, escape aids hidden in playing cards, and operational plans for Allied and Axis forces. Enriched with period photographs, eyewitness accounts, and confidential documents, Hesop's definitive volume brings the strategic scope of human drama of history's greatest conflict vividly to life. Review. I've always enjoyed reading and learning about World War II, and now as a middle-aged man, I'm by law to choose World War II or the Civil War to be the interest, so I'll keep my streak alive. For the past couple years, I've been tutoring kids in geography and history and classical education. This year, I found areas of connection between the two to teach other strands of classical learning. The thing with teaching classical education is oftentimes you find yourself interested in the 15 skills of learning, so I found the connection between geography and war to be closely linked, of course. Having read a number of boots-on-the-ground first-person accounts of or battles or generals or other people of note, I have really been getting into what the generals and leaders see from a bird's-eye view with a map and a compass. What this Nat Geo book does is gives the number of detailed maps and campaigns and battles while walking through the history of pre to post-World War II. This was so well done. Not just using maps, but photos and short write-ups and explaining the events that the maps are showing. And in this oversized book allowed the perspective I was looking for without getting bogged down in such a detailed map that would be lost in every description and event. So while not every elevation and landmass might be available to me to see, there was enough to see how things like Operation Barbarossa made incursions into Russia so far, and how dramatic the island hopping of the Pacific Theater was, and what all was going on with the African theater that gets lost in the details of later developments of the war. For an introduction and mapping out a historical event, this was a perfect book to do so, and it's more than just a coffee table book. You're not going to cut out any of the maps for a detailed look at a battle, but the oversized nature of the book and filled with harrowing descriptions and dramatic photographs made this a useful tool to walk through the history of World War II in a way that I really wasn't used to. Final grade, A. Stones Still Speak, How Biblical Archaeology Illuminates the Stories You Thought You Knew by Amanda Hope Haley. Overview. Many beloved stories, Adam and Eve, the parting in the Red Sea, David and Goliath, Jonah and the Great Fish, arrive in our minds shaped by childhood lessons, films, and cultural retellings that often adds details the text never intended. Harvard-trained archaeologist and theologian Amanda Hope Haley peels away these layers of tradition and modern assumptions, grounding the narratives in their original historical, archaeological, and literary settings. Review. In thinking I was getting a book that covered biblical archaeology, what Haley provides is more commentary on biblical passage to help people to think through what they might think one knows. I'm not opposed to that type of book, but when the book is supposed to be about archaeology, and from a Christian perspective, I didn't get much from it as I was expecting. On top of all that, it appears that Haley is quick to side with the idea that if secular mainstream knowledge hasn't confirmed the biblical accounts, we just can't know if certain parts of the biblical accounts are accurate or historical. However, where secular mainline science has spoken, she is quick to point out where those who believe in God's word as being straightforward and accurate are mistaken, and biblical accounts need to be softened with spiritualization as it contextualizes its lens. There is not much in allowing for explanation that fits inside the biblical narrative in the historical sense here. There are also times where Haley adds stories that are not professional and backbiting at fellow Christians. For example, she takes umbrage with the fact that Ark Encounter charges a fee to enter and her dogs weren't allowed to come on property. What a thing to cry over. She also says that if young Earth creationists were consistent in their reading the Bible, they would also believe in flat Earth and the Earth being the center of the universe. This condescending tone carries throughout the writings, and where she wants to point out poetic writing as a genre lens to view things, she will conflate that for those that she's critical of. When she gets into the biblical translations of text, she presents her preferred side, but doesn't really address some of the concerns with them. For example, if you're a backwater hick who takes the term days in Genesis 1 as being a literal 24-hour period of time, well, you just need to realize that this could just be a period of time, but then tries to tie the same concept with the Sabbath keeping and why people work 6 days and rest for 1. This is done within the span of less than a page in the book. Then she says, God spent 6 yalms, about 13.8 billion years, give or take, making perfection, and humanity went and ruined it in what seems to be a short amount of time. Page 26. So what? Ruined it in a few million years, give or take? But for her, as she said at the end of the chapter, it doesn't really matter what you believe when it comes to how long creation occurred. The global flood and giants during Genesis 6, to her, are fun reads, but it is not history. Page 39. Not using BCE and CE? Well, that's just non-biblical, medieval government-imposed tradition that you want to keep BC and AD. Page 52. Most stories in Genesis don't have much moral value, but they do have redemptive value. Page 58. When knocking translations, especially those with the use of the Septuagint, she offers no discussion on why certain considerations were made or the implications of it. After a while, this starts to read like Peter Ends. And again, I keep flipping through the book, waiting for actual archaeology. Joseph in Egypt, the Exodus, David and Goliath, all those haven't been shown by mainline science, so we don't really know about them. Maybe if the experts wrote papers about them, we could maybe think Goliath was really tall, but probably wasn't. Moses couldn't have made all the trips up and down the mountain. Jonah couldn't really have been swallowed by a big fish. But it's neat to think about, isn't it? Moses didn't write the first 5 books of the Old Testament, but JEDP theory is probably accurate. She doesn't give a reason why these supposed inaccuracies would be the case. Why would Jonah talk about Nineveh in a way that wasn't accurate? Why would the story add extra trips up the mountain for Moses? There's no attempt to harmonize anything, as it appears it's because there's no study to give permission to go that route. There's no talk of Cyrus's scroll, allowing for the Jews to return and rebuild the temple. The chapter on the New Testaments are so short, and the areas where we have a ton of archaeological evidence is more of a discussion point on why you shouldn't think of hotel for inn at Jesus' birth. True, yes. However, so much is missing. So much archaeology is missing. The sources are bleak as well, citing things like movies and VeggieTales with limited scholarly works that would have been interesting to take someone in the field to write a popular level book on the subject that does require that to convey the intricacies of archaeology into commonplace parlance just isn't here. This is the only thing by Haley I read, and I'm not questioning her Christian convictions. This is a review solely based on the book at hand, and for the claim that the stones still speak, it looks like we'll need someone else to help transmit the message. Final grade, D+. The 1-Year Book of Hymns, 365 devotions based on popular hymns by Robert K. Brown and Mark Norton. Overview. Experience the timeless truths embedded in the cherished hymns of the Christian faith through this year-long devotional compiled by Brown and Norton. Each of the 365 entries features the full text of the classic hymn, a fascinating story behind its authors or origins, and a complementary scripture passage to deepen reflection. From beyond favorites that have uplifted believers across centuries to insights, meditations on their enduring message, these daily readings refresh the spirit and draw readers closer to worship. A rich resource for personal devotion, inviting you to join the historic course of praise that continues to resonate today. Review. This was a fine book. Mixing church history along with the hymns have always been important in the church. Makes for a good devotional read after dinner with the family, and finding most of them on YouTube was easy enough. A couple points at issue is that the Bible verses are either KJV or the Message translation. I get the reason because of copyright issues, because of course people have to be an issue and copyright their Bible versions. There were several times I yucked out of reading their printed version and just pulled out my own. Not the most ideal for a one-stop shop devotional. There are also a lot more citations of Methodist hymns. This is not to say they're bad or shouldn't be acknowledged or anything that kicks out anyone out of the kingdom, but the deference given was noticeable. The worst was a couple inclusions by Unitarians, and the authors talk about how God uses all types of people to create hymns for worship. I'm sorry, but no. There's no LDS or JWs were cited here, so why inclusion of this hymn with this message was in very poor taste. Overall, a nice family devotional over an area I was happy to receive some knowledge in. Final grade, B. The Door in the Wall by Marquis de Angeli. Overview. In medieval England, amid the shadow of the Black Death, 10-year-old Robin, son of noble knight and lady, dream of becoming a page and someday a valiant knight himself. When sudden illness leaves him unable to walk and his parents called away on royal service, he finds himself alone and despairing in a plague-stricken London. Rescued by a kind friar, Robin begins a journey of discovery in a monastery, learning new skills and finding unexpected strength through patience and perseverance. Review. After not really liking Adam on the Road by Elizabeth Janet Gray, I was a bit hesitant with this one as I saw similar plot areas in a similar setting. However, this was its own story and offered a few areas of enjoyment when looking over the whole scope of the story. This was a family read for us, and I always have a soft spot for those stories we do together as a family, and it's interesting to see how a story from 1949 can resonate with younger kids, 9 and 7-year-old girls, and us big kids today. The style and pacing is not something you'd have today. There's no anachronistic language or politics or behaviors. De Angeli does a great job of keeping some of the old language in while still allowing it to be readable, and her naming of time period accurate items made the story seem a lot older than I thought it was, in a good way. What impressed me the most was De Angeli's main character Robin going through the character growth arc that he did. There are small moments which the character chooses to make, choices that either allow him the possibility to grow and get outside of his own head or to stay festering in self-loathing and frustration. And like any normal boy youth, he succeeds and fails, and oftentimes without even realizing it. And as the reader, this was true for me too. Other than one really big set piece that shows his arc leading up to the moment these small shifts in characters ring true the meaning of the book's title of having a simple door in the wall he's facing to either go through or not. In fact, I really wasn't sure I was going to be overly positive with the story until the ending, where you get to see his more mature choices that he would never have made in the beginning. And the final chapter is really a standout one to pause and added to the bulk of our family reading discussion. This isn't a story like Three Musketeers where it's swashbuckling and intrigue. It's a simple story that lends to the discussion about virtue when learning, how to tackle adversity, and how youth is not an excuse for sedimentary immorality. Brother Luke and minstrel John Goat in the Wind join Robin on this journey. Brother Luke is a regular pious friar who encourages Robin without browbeating him, but pushes him where he needs to be encouraged. The minstrel also offers assistance as a friend without being condescending to Robin. There is no liar revealed trope here, or friends to enemies to friends again. In fact, the only disservice that I think is done is from the cover of my copy that makes all three seem silly looking and a bungling comedy is about to take place. I think this book for us moderns is a sleeper that might stay with you a bit longer if you let it. If your nihilism and sarcasm can be staved off for a bit, you'll be able to enjoy this book of virtue, living in the small moments that drive out our big character moments. Final grade, B. Die Rock 88 by S.A. Oliver. Overview. In a dystopian future dominated by ruthless corporations, young Atlas Viridian finds his life upended when his father is arrested, thrusting him into the clutches of the Horizon Industries. Dispatched to the remote prison moon Dyrock 88 to work off an impossible debt through perilous resource extraction, he must navigate grim labor, unsettling discoveries beneath the dome, and a mismatched group of fellow inmates. As strange afflictions plague his mind and echoes of his father's shadowy past emerge, Atlas grapples with survival in a cruel society that tests his resilience and sense of self. Review. The first thing that I want to do is talk about the beauty of the cover. Initially, this is what drew me to the book. It's the style like that of Tom Young's Star Wars poster or John Harris's Ender's Game cover. The greens and the blues with the light sources puts me in the mood to read sci-fi every time I pick up the book. This is my first read of indiepub author S.A. Oliver. The prose Oliver has in this book are well crafted, and she takes the time to let characters breathe. Some of the best prose comes in the quiet moments of Atlas's strolling through a garden or characters between pauses in the action. There were a number of lines I went back to read where Oliver's talent shines. What I had the biggest problem with was the overall plot of the tying the character development and the unfolding plot. Atlas goes from a young, petulant child to need to grow on his prison planet, and those moments are there and they take the span of the book. Where I got lost was in the major plot points of the book, though. I didn't understand how the corporate prison company could essentially just kidnap people from all over the galaxy, and how control of that operated through the rest of the galaxy. Atlas is essentially a political prisoner, but there seems to be a limitation imposed by the prison corporation that could grant freedom on work output. Without a communist overarching government or straight-up totalitarian overlord, there seems like no justice could exist in the galaxy. I didn't understand Atlas's father as a terrorist leader, or what extent revelations through the story held weight to what was happening to Atlas. Atlas goes from a scared newbie to somehow being able to fight in prison riots, and being held up as a savior leader because of who his father is. I wasn't sure how the people knew about him or his father's exploits, because Atlas didn't seem to know either. The choice to stay entirely on IROC 88 for the entirety of the book made for repetitive story points, while banking on readers seeing and caring more about the growth of Atlas, and unveiling of convoluted revelations, and almost Deus Ex big picture revelations. While the story needs these points to keep the interest of the reader and the progress of the bigger story elements, I'm not sure they're earned. Atlas as a type of chosen one who just happens to find all he needs on this random space rock prison colony has to happen on, or there's no story. The side characters of the found family trope were interesting and fun, with a few unexpectedly growing on me. However, again, certain revelations happen where the reveal feels so far out of left field that it seems either a giant stroke of luck or an unearned big shock in the reveal. I usually have the opposite problem, where the author wants to take their characters and exposition dump or develop them to the detriment of the halting plot. Here, it's just the opposite, as I wanted more connections to why Atlas was seeing what he was seeing happens to him in the greater plot, but enjoying his character growth. While I didn't hate it, or even not enjoy the book, I felt slightly discombobulated in my reading experience. While I probably won't continue the series, I would check out other books by S.A. Oliver, as I tended to like her character writing and like the futuristic sci-fi world she crafted here. Hopefully, there is enough information in this review to inform readers who may be looking for exactly a book like this in their reading experience. Final grade, B-. Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. Overview. In a quiet back alley in Tokyo lies a centuries-old cafe that serves more than just carefully brewed coffee. It offers patrons the extraordinary chance to travel back in time. 4 visitors, each burdened by regrets, seize this rare opportunity to revisit pivotal moments from their past. Yet the journey comes with strict rules. They must remain seated in one particular chair, never leave the cafe, and above all, return the present before their coffee gets cold. And you'll hear these rules a lot. The author's poignant and heartwarming tale delicately explores the timeless question, what would you change if you could go back, and who would you wish to see one last time? Review. Now, this book is not my usual spinner, even with the time travel aspect to it. But a friend's wife liked it, and I wanted to make sure he was in a relationship with someone who had a passing taste in books. You know how it is. In the past 10 years, the cozy mystery novel has pumped out millions of stories, most of banality. Here is a cozy sci-fi novel that is in a Japanese setting and rooted in the culture. Understanding that this is a translation, the review won't harp on any of the clunky aspects of it, but that's not to say that it is prevalent in the majority. The plot focuses on the 4 stories that take place in the coffee shop, where the portal is guarded by a Japanese woman who is a ghost, who curses anyone who tries to take a seat that one has to be in order to travel in time. There are a number of other rules, and the book grinds to a halt, within the first half of the book to remind you over and over and over of them. The first story involves a girlfriend character who is absolutely annoying, and it doesn't help that the initial pacing of it. But by the second story, which is better, the reminder of the rules again was almost a stopping point for me, as I believed that this would happen in the other 2 stories, and therefore be half of the book. That did not become the case, and I understand the Japanese love their rules, but it was a bit much. The fact that the rules must be followed isn't unique, other than the fact that the version of the time travel makes it so that no matter what anyone does, they cannot change the past. The odd thing about this is that the book gives a thought experiment of a person getting shot by someone traveling back in time, and they would be taken to the hospital and saved, and all the things that need to go right would go absolutely right. Well, I do believe that the fact that one is still shot would be something that is definitely changed about that person. One could say that the point of the story is not to figure out the time travel, but it's about the means by which we see the 4 stories unfold. While this is true, the story brings this up time and time again, again, no pun intended, throughout the story. Michael Crichton's timeline attempted to do something along these lines, and I don't think it worked that well in that book either. Out of the 4 vignettes, each starts as a tragedy, and that's really where all time travel stories start, right? Each one does wind up in a better place for the time traveler characters. The first story of a boyfriend and girlfriend is the worst one. The main character is very annoying, almost caused me to stop the book, along with so many explanations of the rules. However, the second story of the husband and wife was very sweet, and I would say very Japanese. This book isn't going to do well for the progressive feminist. The third story of 2 sisters is probably the best, even if the ending tended to make me say, of course that's what she wanted. The fourth is of the mother and the child, sweet, but it seemed shorter than the other ones, and involved a few more characters that would have been nice to build out even more with the same care that the other stories were given. This book isn't going to be for everyone, and it was just barely in my wheelhouse, but I'm just a Renaissance man who is reading this book for a friendship and love. If you like short stories in a common setting and like character resolutions, especially in a Japanese culture setting, you'll enjoy this. If you're not into sci-fi as much, this only uses time travel mechanics as a story mechanic to complete the arc of the characters. But oh, those rules. Final grade, B-.